what follows, metaphysics is thought as the truth of what is, as such, in its entirety, and not as the given doctrine of any particular thinker. Each thinker has, at any given time, his fundamental philosophical position within metaphysics. The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche writes, I believe the ancient German saying, all gods must die. Gods too decompose. But it is no less certain, and it is to be considered in advance, that the terms God and Christian God in Nietzsche's thinking are used to designate the supersensory world in general. God is the name for the realm of ideas and ideals. The supersensory world is without effective power. It bestows no light. Metaphysics, i.e. for Nietzsche, Western philosophy understood as Platonism, is at an end. Nietzsche understands his own philosophy as the counter-movement to metaphysics. Are we not straying as though an infinite nothing? The pronouncement God is dead contains the confirmation. This nothing is spreading out. Nothing means here absence of a supersensory, obligatory world. Nihilism, the most uncanny of all guests, is standing at the door. Nihilism is a historical movement, and not just any view or doctrine advocated by someone or other. Nihilism moves history after the manner of a fundamental ongoing event. It is scarcely recognized in the destiny of the Western peoples. The speech of the madman says specifically that the word God is dead has nothing in common with the opinions of those who are merely standing about and talking confusedly, who do not believe in God. For those who are merely believers in that way, nihilism has not yet asserted itself at all as the destiny of their own history. So long as we understand the word God is dead only as a formula of unbelief, we are thinking it theologically in the manner of apologetics, and we are renouncing all claims to what matters to Nietzsche, i.e. to the reflection that ponders what has already happened regarding the truth of the supersensory world and regarding its relation to man's essence. In the word God is dead, the name God, thought essentially, stands for the supersensory world of those ideals which contain the goal that exists beyond earthly life. For that life, and that accordingly, determines life from above, and also in a certain way, from without. But now, when unalloyed faith in God, as determined through the Church, dwindles away, when in particular the doctrine of faith, theology in its role of serving as the normative explanation of that which is as a whole, is curtailed and thrust aside, and the fundamental structuring in keeping with which the fixing of goals extending into the supersensory, rule-sensory earthly life, is in no way thereby shattered as well. The realm for the essence and the coming to pass of nihilism is metaphysics itself, provided always we do not mean by this name a doctrine. We name this decay in the essence of the supersensory, its disessentializing, unbelief in the sense of a falling away from the Christian doctrine of faith, is therefore never the essence and the ground, but always only a consequence of nihilism. For it could be that Christendom itself represents one consequence, embodying forth of nihilism. In a note from the year 1887, Nietzsche poses the question, what does nihilism mean? He answers that the highest values are devaluing themselves. According to this note, Nietzsche understands nihilism as an ongoing historical event. For Nietzsche, nihilism is not in any way simply a phenomenon of decay, rather nihilism as the fundamental event of Western history. Simultaneously, and above all, the intrinsic law of that history. The no to the values hitherto come out as a yes to the new positing of values, because in this yes, according to Nietzsche's view, there is no accommodation to or compromise with the former values. The absolute no belongs within this yes to the new value positing. Pessimism, which Nietzsche sees as the prefiguration of nihilism, is already twofold also in the same sense. According to Schopenhauer, pessimism is the belief that in this worst of worlds, life is not worth being lived and affirmed. According to this doctrine, life, and that means at the same time all existence as such, is to be denied. This pessimism is, according to Nietzsche, the pessimism of weakness. Completed nihilism must in addition do away with even the place of value itself, with the supersensory as a realm, and accordingly must posit and revalue values differently. It is a question of the positing of values anew, and ultimately and intrinsically a question of the positing of the principle of all value positing, a positing that values differently. Nietzsche says in a note, what he understands by value, the point of view of value, is the point of view constituting the preservation and enhancement conditions with respect to complex forms of relative duration of life within becoming. The essence of value lies in its being a point of view. Value means that upon which the eye is fixed. Value means that which is in view, foreseeing that aims at something, or that, as we say, reckons upon something and therewith must reckon with something else. Value stands in intimate relation to so much, to quantity and number. Hence values are related to numerical and measurable scale. The question still remains, upon what is the scale of increase and decrease in its turn grounded? Value is value inasmuch as it counts. It counts inasmuch as it is posited as that which matters. What is meaningful is that which draws closer to us in its essence. Everywhere here, in what has preceded and in what follows, everything is thought from out of the essence of metaphysics, and not merely from out of one of its phases. Where I found the living, there I found the will to power, and even in the will of those who serve, I found the will to be master. To will is to will to be master. Even to be a slave is to will to be master. The will is not a desiring, and not a mere striving after something, but rather willing is in itself a commanding. Commanding has in its essence in the fact that the master who commands has conscious disposal over the possibilities for effective action. What is commanded in the command is the accomplishing of that disposal. In the command, the one who commands, not only the one who executes, is obedient to that disposing, and to that being able to dispose, and in that way obeys himself. Accordingly, the one who commands proves superior to himself, in that he ventures even his own self. Commanding, which is to be sharply distinguished from the mere ordering about of orders, is self-conquest, and is more difficult than obeying. Will is gathering oneself together for the given task. Only he who cannot obey himself must still be expressly commanded. What the will wills, it does not merely strive after, as something it does not yet have. What the will wills, it has already. For the will wills its will. Its will is what it has willed. The will wills itself. It mounts beyond itself. Accordingly, the will as will wills out beyond itself, and must at the same time in that way bring itself behind itself and beneath itself. To the essence of power belongs the overpowering of itself. Power does not merely empower itself for the overpowering of its level of power at any given time, for the sake of reaching the next level, but rather it empowers itself for this reaching alone, to attain power over itself, in the unconditionality belonging to its essence. Willing is, according to this definition of its essence, so little a striving that rather all striving is only a vestigial or an embryonic form of willing. As a commanding, the will unites itself to itself, i.e., it unites itself to what it wills. Also, will and power are, in the will to power, not merely linked together, but rather the will, as the will to will, is itself the will to power in the sense of the empowering to power. But power has its essence in the fact that it stands to the will as the will standing within that will. The will to power is the essence of power. It manifests the unconditional essence of the will, which has pure will. The will to power is in its essence the value positing will. Here life means the will to will. Living, that much already means to ascribe worth. When metaphysics thinks whatever is, in its being, as the will to power, then it necessarily thinks it as value positing. The will to power in that it posits the preservation, the securing of its own constancy and stability as a necessary value. The making secure that constitutes this holding to be true is called certainty. The question of value is more fundamental than the question of certainty. The latter becomes serious only by presupposing that the value question has already been answered. That which is steadily constant in this way is that which remains. True to the essence of being, being equals enduring presence. Holding sway in the history of metaphysics, Nietzsche calls this steadily constant, that which is in being, but because the will can only will only from out of its disposal over something steadily constant, truth is a necessary value, precisely from out of the essence of the will to power for that will. Truth is now, but truth does not count as a supreme standard of value, even less as supreme power. Art is the essence of all willing that opens up perspectives and takes possession of them. The world as a work of art that gives birth to itself. Art excites the will to power, first of all, towards itself, and goads it on to willing out beyond itself, because Nietzsche, in fading reminiscence of the Zoe and physis of early Greek thinkers, often also calls the will to power as the reality of the real life. He can also say that art is the great stimulant of life. The will to power is the reality of the real, or taking the word more broadly than Nietzsche usually is accustomed to using it, the being of that which is. The principle runs, art is worth more than truth. This mode in which the will is at the same time the manner in which the will sets forth into the unconcealment of itself, and therein lies the will's truth. Self-presenting, representation, self-knowing itself is transformed into subject, purely and simply. In self-knowing itself, all-knowing and what is knowable, for it gathers itself together. Justification is the accomplishing of justitia, and is thus justice itself. It justifies itself before the claim to justice that it itself has posited. Justice must, in fact, confront modern metaphysical thinking as the self-knowing being of everything in being, as soon as the being of whatever is appears as the will to power. The latter knows itself as that which is essentially value-positing. Justice as building, separating, annihilating mode of thinking out of value judgments, highest representative of life itself. Justice is a function of power, having a wide range of vision, which sees out beyond the narrow perspectives of good and evil, thus has a wider horizon of interest, the aim to preserve something that is more than this or that particular person. But what is right is determined from out of that which, as whatever is in being. Thus Nietzsche says, right equal, the will to eternalize a momentary power, relation. Satisfaction with that relation is its presupposition. Everything sacred is drawn towards it to let the right appear as eternal. The problem of justice, what is first and most powerful, of course, is precisely the will to and the strength for superpower. The ruler establishes justice only afterwards, i.e., he measures things according to his standard. If he is very powerful, he can go very far toward giving free rein to and recognizing the individual who tries. We possess art, lest we perish of the truth. Around the hero everything turns into tragedy, around the demigod into a satyr play, and around God What, perhaps, into world? In the fundamental principle of Nietzsche's Metaphysics, the unity of the essence of the will to power is named with the naming of the essential relation between art and truth. Out of this unity of essence, belonging to what is as such, the metaphysical essence of value is determined. Value is the twofold condition of the will to power itself, posited in the will to power for the will to power. Because Nietzsche experiences the being of everything that is as the will to power, his thinking must think out toward value. For the reality of the real, now explicitly experienced, i.e. the will to power, becomes the origin and norm of a new value positing. Its values directly determine human representing, and in like manner inspire human activity. Being human is lifted into another dimension of happening. Nihilism, that the highest values are devaluating themselves, has been overcome. Man hitherto is, in his essence, not yet at all prepared for being. The suprasensory ground, consisting in the suprasensory world, thought as the operative, working reality of everything real, has become unreal. That is the metaphysical meaning of the word God is dead, thought metaphysically. Will we persist in closing our eyes in the face of the truth of this word, to be thought in this way? If we do so, the word will certainly not become untrue through this curious blindness. God is still not a living God when we persist in trying to master the real, without taking God's reality seriously and calling it into question beforehand, and only persist in this without pondering whether man has so matured for the essence into which, from out of being, his being drawn, that he may withstand and surmount that destining genuinely from out of his essence, and not do so at the sham help of mere expedients. We show respect for a thinker only when we think dead are all gods. Now we will that over men live. Never can man put himself in the place of God, because the essence of man never reaches the essential realm belonging to God. On the contrary, compared with this impossibility, something far more uncanny can happen, something whose essence we have scarcely begun to consider. Thought metaphysically, the place that is peculiar to God is the place of the causative bringing about and preserving of whatever is, as something created. That place of God can remain empty. Instead of it, i.e. a place corresponding metaphysically, can loom on the horizon, a place that is identical neither with the essential realm belonging to God, nor with that of man, but with which man comes once more into distinctive relationship. Overman never enters at all into the place of God. Rather, the place in which his willing enters is another realm belonging to another grounding of what is, in its other being, this other being of what is, meanwhile. And this marks the beginning of modern metaphysics, has become subjectness. Man, within the subjectness belonging to whatever is, rises up into the subjectivity of his essence. Man enters into insurrection. The earth itself can show itself only as the object of assault, an assault that, in human willing, establishes itself as unconditional objectification. Nature appears everywhere, because willed from out of the essence of being, as the object of technology. Making conscious is a necessary instrument of the willing that wills from out of the will to power. It happens in respect to objectification in the form of a planet. The great noon is the time of the brightest brightness, namely of the consciousness that unconditionally and in every respect has become conscious of itself, as that knowing which consists in deliberately willing the will to power as the being of whatever is, and as such willing, in rebelliously withstanding and subjugating to itself every necessary phase of the objectifying of the world, thus making secure its stably constant reserve of what is for willing of the greatest possible uniformity and equality. In the willing of this will, however, there comes upon man the necessity that he concomitantly will the conditions the requirements of such a willing. That means to posit values, and to ascribe worth to everything in keeping with values. In such a manner does value determine all that is in its being. This being has been transformed into a value. Nothing is happening to being, God, the first of being. The interpretation of the supersensory world, the interpretation of God as the highest value, is not thought from out of being itself. The ultimate blow against God and against the supersensory world consists in the fact that God, the first of beings, is degraded to the highest value. The heaviest blow against God is not that God is held to be unknowable, not that God's existence is demonstrated to be unprovable, but rather that the God held to be real is elevated to the highest value. For this blow comes precisely not from those who are standing about, who do not believe in God, but from the believers and their theologians, who discourse on the being that is of all beings most in being, without ever letting it occur to them to think on being itself, in order thereby to become more aware, that, seen from out of faith, their thinking and their talking is sheer blasphemy, if it meddles in the theology of faith. How can it happen at all that men are ever capable of killing God? The word sun at once recalls Plato's allegory. According to the latter, the sun and the realm of its light are the sphere in which that which appears, according to its visible aspect, or according to its many countenances. Ideas. Horizon refers to the supersensory world as the world that truly is. This is at the same time that whole which envelopes all and in itself, includes all as does the sea. The earth, as the abode of man, is unchained from its sun. The realm that constitutes the supersensory, which, as such, is in itself, no longer stands over man, as the authoritative light. The whole field of vision has been wiped away. The whole of that which is, as sun, the sea, as such, the sea has been drunk up by man. That which is, as the objective, is swallowed up into the eminence of subjectivity. The horizon no longer emits light of itself. The killing means the act of doing away with the supersensory world that is in itself an act accomplished through man. The doing away with that which is in itself, i.e. the killing of God, is accomplished in the making secure of the constant reserve by means of which man makes secure for himself material, bodily, psychic, and spiritual resources, and this for the sake of his own security, which wills dominion over whatever is as the potentially objective, in order to correspond to the being of whatever is, to the will to power. Thinking in terms of values is radical killing. It not only strikes down that which is as such in its being in itself, but it does away utterly with being. The latter can, where it is still needed, pass only for value. The value thinking of the metaphysics of the will to power is murderous in a most extreme sense, because it absolutely does not let being itself take its rise, i.e. come into the vitality of its essence. Thinking in terms of values precludes in advance that being itself will attain to a coming to presence in its truth. The history of being begins, and indeed necessarily, with the forgetting of being. But what is metaphysics? Do we know its essence? Can it itself know that essence? If it conceives it, it grasps it metaphysically. But the metaphysical concept of metaphysics constantly falls short of its essence. This holds also for every logic, assuming that logic is still at all capable of thinking what logos is. Every metaphysics of metaphysics and every logic of philosophy that in any way, whatever attempts to climb beyond metaphysics, falls back most surely beneath metaphysics, without knowing where, precisely in so doing, it has fallen. Nothing is befalling being itself and its truth. But if the essence of nihilism lies in history, then metaphysics has the history of the truth of what is as such is in its essence nihilism. It would lie in being's own essence, then, that being remain unthought because it withdraws. Being itself withdraws into its truth. Metaphysics, as the history of the truth of what is as such, would have to come to pass from out of the destining of being itself. Metaphysics would be, in its essence, the mystery of being itself, a mystery that is unthought because withheld. Were it otherwise, a thinking that takes pains to hold to being in what is to be thought could not unceasingly ask, what is metaphysics? Metaphysics is an epoch of the history of being itself, but in its essence, metaphysics is nihilism. Nothing is befalling everything, and in every respect. I seek God, cried the madman incessantly. For those men who are not unbelievers, because God is God, has to them become unworthy of belief, but because they themselves have given up the possibility of belief, inasmuch as they no longer are able to seek God. They can no longer seek because they no longer think. Thinking only begins when we have come to know that reason, glorified for centuries, is the most stiff-necked adversary of thought.